Wow, and that's it. Everything I just took off is back on, with no swearing or anything. It wasn't a pain at all. Alright, the next step is actually kind of fun. It's time, now that we have all of the mounting holes available, to start assembling the tower, which I'm going to do on that table over there. And then we can, loosely assembling the tower, and then what we can do is slide it on to the headstay here and start tightening everything up and getting the dash in order. So it's actually a good part of the install now. We're just going to take, so like I said, I'm not going to go into the soldering too much here. They give you wires of the right length that match the color of the wires in the bundles of wires that go into the regulator rectifier. It looks like we have 7 wires total. So you're gonna have to cut, strip, solder, and shrink wrap. Just make sure, when you're soldering, you don't solder and forget to put the shrink wrap on. And then you'll probably wanna use some form of either loom or whatever you got to re-protect this, right? Because right now these things definitely protect against any friction and make sure that the wires don't wear down and rub on the frame. So yeah, so I'm gonna do that. And then let's just assume that you guys know how to do that and can reinstall this regulator rectifier. And then we'll talk about getting the tower on the front. All right, guys, here is the new extended regulator rectifier. Don't mind the color. I've got some, I thought I had some wire loom, some cloth wire loom tape here, but I don't, so I had to order some more. So I might just install it and then rewrap it another time. But I've had my first and second big bonehead moment of this install. When you're extending this regulator rectifier by adding these kind of probably 5-inch pieces of wire that Nomad ADV includes, when you're extending them, it's probably way smarter to extend them closer to the connection than closer to the regulator itself. For some reason, my brain, when I chose where to put the extensions in, did it close to the regulator itself versus down by this connection. And now I realize that once the tower is on the bike, like so, you have this thicker part of the cable that now has to pass through right where the left side fork is going to be turning. So if anything, you want to make sure, it would be smarter probably to cut it somewhere about a couple inches from this black connector, and then maybe 3 or 4 inches from this white connector, and extend the regulator there so that you can just hide all this thicker cable crap underneath the frame rail here versus having it by the headstay, which is really stupid. So learn from my mistakes. Extend your regulator rectifier wires closer to the loom. If it ends up being an issue, I might just buy a new one of these and do it again. It's $146 for a new regulator rectifier, so just keep that in mind too as you're doing this. It's not a cheap part. My other bonehead moment thus far was that Nomad ADV gives you what should be a one-piece front brake line guide that goes onto the left fork tube like this and guides this front brake line, because that's actually on the stock bike part of the front fairing. I tried to slide it over this black plastic part of the front brake line, which is pretty thick, and it broke it. So when you're installing, so I gotta find another one of these front brake line guides that mounts to the fork tube. So note that I just got really excited. I was like, oh cool, I want to put this on and see how it looks. And I tried to stuff it over this thing, and it literally just snapped right in half. So when you're installing your front brake line guide, go around the thinner part above this, and it'll probably go through, and then you can slide it down over the black plastic part. So that was pretty stupid. So 2 bonehead moments already. Not a huge deal, but I wish I didn't do those. Okay. All right, so one of the last things that I remembered too was that I am putting in a USB port on the right side of the tower here. So one of the things you want to do is kind of take a look at everything. The left side is not so great because your regulator has to go back onto this side, so it basically covers these two ports, so you're only left with this top one. So I chose, and fingers crossed is the right one, the middle hole on the right side of the tower to mount my USB port, and now I have to use a step drill to drill that out. I think I got metal shavings in my laptop. That's great. This is what the USB port looks like mounted now. I'm gonna pull it back out as I'm installing the tower. But yeah, it's pretty simple. It actually has a lot of room between the bend here and the tower. So this is actually probably a great spot to do it. And like I said, the left side of the tower here is where your regulator rectifier mounts, so you don't want to use these two holes. I will say that the Nomad ADV instructions are a little bit hard to follow from like a stepwise procedure. So what I'm going to try to do here is help you understand how to set yourself up for success and not get to the end and have like 5 bolts left over. Okay, so one of the things that I've just done is laid out all of the parts for the tower right in front of me. So basically, at the end of the day, what you have is the 2 tower halves, 5 long cross members, 4 short cross members, a mount and some spacers where the regulator and rectifier used to go that now the left half uses, and then a whole bunch of bolts over here. So what I've been doing here is I have my laptop open, I'm looking at the schematics, and the thing that just opened this up for me in terms of the installation is actually writing the labels of the bolts on the bags that Nomad ADV gives me. That will allow me to confidently assemble these 2 halves, get it on the bike, and then work my way into the fairing and the screen and the dash itself. So I highly recommend that anybody taking on this install lays out everything on the table, has their laptop or a printout or whatever they possibly can put together here right in front of them, and labels all the different bolts that you have, because there are very similar bolts with very similar nuts, very similar washers, all like that. And it's best if you just have it, you know exactly where each one of them goes, and then can just line them up as you work through this. So what I'm gonna do is start putting the right side of the tower together, knowing that I'm using the right bolts from this layout that I have over here, which matches my schematic on my laptop. And that way I can just know, okay, this cross member goes here. There are only 2 different cross members that you need to know exactly where they go. There is a long one that is specific for the windscreen, and then there's a short one that is specific to where the dash cover mounts, like so. So those are the things to keep in mind. Let's just get into it, and I'll try my best here to show you why each thing goes where it goes. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to start with is the unique short cross member. There is a short cross member that is used to mount a screw through this single part of the upper dash cover. I'm going to go ahead and mount that to the front hole in this flat middle section of the tower right here with an M6 by 20 mil. And I'm going to do this super loose so that I can still slide this slightly assembled tower over the headstay. That's where we're starting. At the end of the day, the unique short cross member will have the flat spot towards the top with a plastic washer on top of it to make sure the dash and the dash cover does not rattle against the cross member. Now I know that all 3 of these other short cross members can be threaded through here without having to worry about where they go. You'll also note that right now I'm assembling these without Loctite. That's intentional. I'm going to assemble all of this loosely without Loctite And then once everything is completely confirmed to be in the right position and the lights are mounted and all like that, I'll take out each bolt individually and reassemble and torque with Loctite. All right, all the short cross members are in now. I'll probably go ahead and get this thing assembled onto the bike loosely and then do the long cross members in the front because they're pretty easily accessible. These short cross members are a little bit tight and very close to the headstay. This way I can slide this thing over and get the M8 95mm long bolts that go through the frame in place. What I'm going to do is slide the right side of the tower, and you can see that I'm holding the long bolts in my hand, get it in place, and then I've got a long bolt with a washer, the smaller washer, and then I've got one of these bigger washers in my hand. I'm going to go ahead and get that to thread through itself and get through the frame, like so. And do the same thing on the bottom. I'm just going to get that washer. Also going to make sure that I'm not pinching the horn. Let's get those frame through bolts in place. All right, looking good. One of the things you're going to want to do when you put this right side of the tower on is make sure that none of your wires are being pinched by the tower in any way. Get everything out of the way, to the right. All makes sense why we separated them earlier, right? Before you start working on the left side of the tower, one of the things you're going to want to make sure you do is mount this spacer slash mount to the old regulator mounting holes on the headstay. Goes spacer. I'm going to try to hold this in place. Screw. Washer. There you go. Get it loosely in place. And also make sure to just get your clutch line out of the way before you start working on the left side of the tower. You might as well place your large spacer washers on them and maybe give them a little tug again and just hang the washers right there before you place the left side of the tower, and then lightly bring your handlebars back to even. Okay, so at this point you're ready to get the left side of your tower in place. As you can see, the short cross members are just kind of hanging right there, and this mount is just somewhat loosely sitting in place. So I've got one of the short cross member screws with a washer, with the correct washer in my hand, and I also have a nylock nut and one of the washers for one of the frame through bolts in my hand as well. So I'm just going to try to slide this guy in and get one of these started and get one of those started, and then hopefully I can start working on everything else pretty easily. All right, not that bad. Let's take a look. As you can see, that one started. These other ones are just hanging loosely. I'll go ahead and work my way around there. And this one started right here. I just haven't put a nut on the bottom through bolt right there. But you see, it goes. Big washer next to the frame, small washer next to the tower, nylock nut here. And they recommend they put the Allen side of the frame through bolt on this side because it's the one that's most visible when the bike is on the kickstand. So whatever you think though, you could go the other way if that's your fancy. You can see the two screws that are holding the new mounting system that leverages the old regulator mount. You can see the two nylock nuts and the washers that are going on the frame through bolts. And you can see these three shorter screws with washer that are going into the three holes that are supported by the new mount. You can also see the four screws on this side that are going into the short cross members that are still loose. You can also see where the dash mounts on this forward cross member, this forward short cross member. You can also see these four on this side and all these wires off to the side. And then you can see the other two heads on this side. Man, I really wish somebody else had done this video before I did it, because this would have made this a lot easier. You can also see that the mount is a little bit off kilter, but that's okay. The thing will level itself out as these are tightened and square up. You know, one of the things I will say is that I was actually pretty frustrated with this install until this point, and now that this thing is in place, I'm really, really excited actually. This is looking really cool. It's not as protruding as I thought it was going to be. It just looks right for the bike. It just makes the bike feel more aggressive. So I'm really excited to get into these next steps. It's time to start installing some of the long cross members in the front of the tower. There is one cross member that has 3 symmetric holes drilled into it. That is the one that goes in the top here and supports the fairing. So it looks different than the other long cross members that have one 8mm hole and then 1, 2 threaded holes. So the one that has the 3 symmetrical holes wants to be the top forward facing cross member. And you want to make sure that there are 2 different sides. There's a short side or narrow side in terms of the groove, and then a wide side. What we want to do is put the narrow side facing forward in the tower. So let's go ahead and do that. It also uses different hardware than the other long cross members. All of the other long cross members are mounted in their appropriate positions, and you have to refer to your schematic, especially depending on your bike, to where exactly which holes those are, with the wide groove facing upward. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. I think it's the next one down, also uses slightly different hardware than the rest. So just keep that in mind. So from what I can tell from the diagram, it's the upper and second long cross member down, right? So if you work your way down in the long cross members, it's the second long cross member down that uses the slightly shorter hardware than the rest, which are like M6 by 20mm. So there should be some M6 by 16mm. From what I can tell from the schematic, it's these 2 in the top that use that shorter hardware. So I've got all the cross members in place now. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm just taking a socket that has the right size T30 Torx and just giving these a little bit of a tighten. And one of the things that I really notice once that happens is that the rigidity of the tower system has gone up like tenfold, which is exactly what I'm expecting, which is really cool. Once again, I'm not tightening them down in any way, shape, or form because I'm going to take out every single one of these bolts and then add some Loctite, some blue Loctite. But I just want to get a little bit more stability here before I start mounting lights and that sort of thing. Okay. Now that we've got all the cross members in place, right, and this one's facing forward with the narrow side, these other 4 are all facing up with the wide flat side up, and then this little guy is facing up with a little flat spot for the dash mount. Everything's lightly tightened, not cranked down by any means. But the next step here is going to be mounting the headlights to the tower system. After a little bit of back and forth with the Nomad guys, I changed the mounting angle of these cross members. They're not flat with these particular lights. They're actually rotated forward. As you can see, both the Vision X lights are basically flush with the windscreen, and obviously the big one on the bottom is sticking out a fair amount. But when I had them mounted before, when these cross members were mounted up and sitting, and the light was sitting on top of it, the light was so far back in the windscreen, it was almost like here, that it would actually be shooting a bunch of light into this plastic, and the whole edge of the fairing would almost light up. So I talked to the Nomad guys, and they told me how to rotate these cross members forward, which is unique to these Vision X lights. It's not, you don't have to do that in the Baja Squadrons lights or the other Vision X lights. It's just unique to these Vision X Dura lights. So you have to rotate the bottom one forward a little bit, and then you can see that the mounting arm is actually pointing forward. I don't know if you can see that on the top one. It's kind of, there you go. The mounting arm is actually pointing forward. That's how you get these guys to come forward and be the right way in the fairing. Okay, let's get the top light in place. I will say that the bracket on this one is incredibly sloppy, so one of the things I'm going to do first is just get it tightened up a little bit snug so that it's not going to be flopping around so much as I'm trying to get it in rough alignment. There we go. It can still move, but it's not sloppy anymore, right? Cool. Okay, new development. It looks like the stock bolt that comes with the Short Vision X light is not long enough to make it through our crossmember here. So we gotta go back to our bolts and find a longer bolt. Okay, so there weren't any bolts in the Nomad ADV kit that could replace the too short stock bolt, but I was able to find a 8mm bolt from my KTM EXC bolt kit that will do the trick. The only issue is I'm gonna have to hold it with an 8mm wrench on the top versus leveraging the little stoppers right here that holds the nut, that holds the bolt. All right, so we've got two lights roughly mounted here. I definitely cranked down the upper one because it's actually really hard to get to this lower nut, but I left the cross members here a little bit loose, and the lower one is still a little bit loose right now, and so are the tilt of the upper and lower. So next step, get this guy in, and then we can start getting the wires in the dash in. So once you have that windscreen installed, just make sure that you have enough room on the top cross member to put the two nylon washers that the dash is going to sit on. So that's what we're going to do next, actually, is put 3 nylon washers where the dash cover is going to sit on, and I'm going to put those on with a little bit of silicone on the backside so that they don't move around off of these cross members. All right, so there we go. Those washers are now installed, those nylon washers. So that's going to alleviate any metal-to-metal contact and decrease wear between the dash cover and these cross members. So while this glue is drying, let's go head over and go start working on the dash itself. There's some modification that's going to have to happen to get the stock key barrel in, and also I got to get the turn signal indicator lens in there, and the new KTM dash unit. Well, not the new, but put the KTM dash unit in there by removing the rubber mounts from the old unit. So let's just go ahead and start doing that too. Okay, so one of the next things I'm going to work on is getting the factory KTM key into this hole. It does not fit directly in there, and I think Nomad ADV made this key with this notch, or this hole with this notch, for their waterproof key, and I wanted to keep the factory KTM key barrel so that I could only have one key for the headstay lock too. So as you can see, the factory KTM key has a flat spot right there, and it will not fit into this hole. So what I'm going to do is just actually grind a little bit of a flat spot out right here so this thing won't rotate, and hopefully it'll slide in if I just kind of flatten this edge and that edge right there. The other thing I noticed is that the factory KTM barrel is way too long, so I've got some thick rubber O-rings I'm going to try to throw on the back here and see if I can make that compress nicely. Oh. Let's get out the Dremel, see what happens. So I'm just going to touch base on the spacing first. I just slid this O-ring on the factory key, and that looks like it might be just right, where it gets me just enough threading on the top, and will also give a little bit of shock absorption on the bottom. So yeah, if you're going to reuse the factory key, just go ahead and grab yourself some 1 3/16 outer diameter, 15/16 inner diameter by 1/8 inch O-rings. All right, so you can see here that now this ignition slides into this hole and has a little flat spot over there. It's not perfect, but it does work. The only issue is that the nut, the factory retaining nut, has a little lip on it that bottoms out on the plastic. So what I might do is try to go find some kind of rubber washer to put behind this nut, because the O-ring is actually the perfect spacing on the back, which is great. So yeah, so one O-ring on the back, and then I'll go try to find a rubber washer to put on this side, and then use a little bit of Loctite, just a teeny bit, to keep this guy from vibrating out, but it's very close. So This is good enough for now, like so. I mean, it is snug, but it will still rotate and kind of vibrate a little bit. So if I just had one small rubber washer on this side here, I could get a good tension that would be pretty perfect for this. So that's pretty good. The next step is going to be getting these rubber grommets out of this factory plastic brace that mounted to the top of the triple clamp to hold the factory dash in place. So we're going to reuse those on the Nomad dash here. So what you got to do is cut this little rubber piece in the back using some sort of knife and then pop these guys out. There we go. Starting to look about right, huh? So this definitely vibrates a little bit, but it's supposed to, right? It's rubber mounted intentionally. All right, so the last thing I'm gonna try to do here, and I'm not super confident that this thing can come out easily, is get this little turn signal indicator lens out. It is not super happy, so I've tried kind of prying it out a couple times already, and it's not super easy, so I'm able to try to... I just feel like I'm gonna break it, you know? I'm gonna try pressing it out. This table's flexing. There we go. Okay. Sweet. Yeah, just goes right in there. They did say when you're reinstalling it, there is a little notch that goes into the notch here, but to also just use a little bit of silicone or glue to hold it in place so that it doesn't vibrate out, because it will be sitting in aluminum, which could potentially wear it down over time versus the plastic brace. There we go. We got a dash. So you'll notice that I already put the toggles in. It's up to you whether you get toggles or not. For the accessories that I want to run, I wanted to have 4 toggles. And you'll also notice that I installed this little ram mount thing too. That's really straightforward. I just went and got some nylock nuts for the back so it doesn't vibrate out. The same thing goes for the toggles. They say assemble with a little bit of thread locker. And then if you don't have toggles though, you can ask for these little rubber grommets that fill in the holes that you can get from Nomad. So, but yeah, at this point my dash is pretty much done. So I'm gonna go ahead and start working on getting the wiring in place on the bike, and then we can put this in place and potentially take it for a little test drive before I start working on accessories. Cool.